In 1952, 7 children stood before the Braxton County Sheriff's Office, their clothes torn and smelling of sulfur, each one insisting they had encountered something on the hillside that September evening that should not exist. Their testimonies matched too closely for coincidence, their terror too genuine for performance. The adults wanted explanations, but we had none that fit inside the boundaries of reason. So before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I was 13 that September, old enough to know the difference between imagination and reality, young enough that adults still dismissed what I said as childhood fancy. My name is Eddie Lemon, and I lived with my mother and younger brother Neil on a small farm just outside Flatwoods, West Virginia. The town was nothing special, a scatter of houses along the Elk River, a schoolhouse, 2 churches, and a general store where farmers gathered to complain about crop prices and the weather. The evening of September 12th started like any other. The heat of the day had broken into a tolerable warmth, and the air carried the smell of cut hay and distant rain. Neil and I were in the yard with our friends Tommy Heyer and Teddy Neal, both 10, and Ronald Shaver and Theodore Johnson, both 13, like me. We were tossing a football in the fading light, arguing about the Cleveland Browns' chances that season, when Tommy stopped mid-throw and pointed at the sky. A bright object streaked overhead, pulsing red-orange against the darkening sky. It moved too slowly for a shooting star, too steadily for an airplane in trouble. The thing descended at a sharp angle toward the hills, leaving a trail of light that lingered in the air like smoke. We watched it disappear behind the tree line on the Fisher property, maybe 3/4 of a mile up the hill from our house. "Did you see that?" Neil asked, his voice pitched high with excitement. We all had. The object had been too bright, too deliberate in its path to ignore. Without discussion, we started toward the hill. Tommy ran to get his mother, Mrs. May, who lived next door. She came out onto her porch, dish towel still in hand, and listened to our jumbled explanation. A good woman, Kathleen May, practical and steady, the type who kept a garden that never failed and could stretch $1 into 2. She should have told us to stay put, but something in our faces, or perhaps her own curiosity, made her grab a flashlight. "We'll take a quick look," she said. "Probably just a meteorite. The university people will want to know where it landed." Eugene Lemon, no relation to us despite the name, joined our group as we passed his house. At 17, he was the oldest among us children, home from National Guard training. He carried himself with new military bearing, chest out, shoulders back. He took the flashlight from Mrs. May, declaring he would lead the way. The path up Fisher's Hill was well worn from years of our playing, but in the dimming light, it felt different. The normal evening sounds, crickets, tree frogs, the distant bark of dogs had stopped entirely. The silence pressed against our ears like cotton. Even our footsteps seemed muffled in the tall grass. As we climbed, a mist rose from the ground, carrying an acrid smell that made our eyes water. Not wood, smoke, or burning leaves, but something chemical and wrong, like hot metal mixed with rotten eggs. Mrs. May pulled her collar up over her nose. The younger boys started coughing. "Maybe we should go back," Ronald said. "We're almost there," Eugene insisted, though I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. The Fisher property had been abandoned for 2 years since the old man died without heirs. The house at the hilltop stood empty, its windows dark and broken. Apple trees grew wild in what had been an orchard, their branches twisted into strange shapes. We skirted the house, following the direction where we had seen the object fall. The fog grew thicker as we climbed, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. Eugene's flashlight beam looked solid in the haze, like a white bar extending into nothing. The smell intensified until my stomach turned with each breath. Tommy grabbed his mother's hand. Teddy moved closer to me. Then Eugene stopped so suddenly that Neil bumped into his back. "Look at that," Eugene whispered. Ahead, through the fog, a large oak tree stood at the edge of a clearing. Beneath it, something glowed with a dull red light, pulsing slowly like a dying ember. The thing was massive, perhaps 15 feet across, shaped like an ace of spades, with the top pointed upward. The surface appeared to pulse and shift, though whether from heat or something else, I could not tell. "Is that it?" Mrs. May asked. "The meteorite?" Eugene swept the flashlight beam across the clearing. The light caught something that made us all step backward. Eyes, red eyes, glowing like hot coals, set in a shape that rose above the pulsing object. As the beam steadied, we saw more. The thing stood at least 10 feet tall. Its body was dark, darker than the night around it, shaped roughly like a man but wrong in every proportion. The head was not a head but a pointed hood or ace-shaped cowl that emerged directly from the shoulders. No neck. The red eyes sat where a face should be, perfectly round, the size of silver dollars. Behind the hood, elongated shapes extended outward, not quite arms, not quite wings, but something that suggested both and neither. The creature made no sound, but the air around it vibrated with a low hum that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. The fog swirled around its form, drawn into patterns that hurt to follow with my eyes. The red glow from the object below it cast moving shadows that made its shape seem to shift and change. Mrs. May screamed. The sound broke our paralysis. Eugene dropped the flashlight, and it hit the ground, still shining, sending wild shadows across the clearing. The creature moved, then not walked, but glided toward us with a horrible smooth motion like oil spreading across water. A high-pitched whistle filled the air, so sharp it made my teeth ache. We ran. I grabbed Teddy's arm and pulled him with me. Eugene pushed past us all, his National Guard training forgotten in panic. Mrs. May tried to gather the younger boys, but they scattered into the fog. I could hear Neil calling my name, Theodore sobbing, Tommy screaming for his mother. The darkness and mist turned the hillside into a maze of shadows and invisible obstacles. I tripped over a root and went down hard, skinning both palms. Teddy hauled me up, and we kept running. Behind us, that whistle continued, neither growing closer nor fading away, maintaining the same terrible pitch that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Branches tore at our clothes. The chemical smell grew so strong that my eyes streamed tears. Somehow, we all made it to the Lemon House, though we arrived in different groups and states of hysteria. Eugene had beaten us all there, already pounding on the door. Mrs. May came last, half carrying Tommy, her face pale as paper. We burst inside, and Eugene slammed the door behind us, turning the lock with shaking hands. My mother was in the living room with several neighbors, drawn by the commotion. She took one look at us, torn clothes, scratched faces, eyes wide with terror, and pulled Neil and me against her. "What happened? What's wrong?" Everyone tried to talk at once. Mrs. May's voice cracked as she described the creature. Eugene kept repeating 10 feet tall, over and over. The younger boys sobbed into their mother's shoulders. The adults exchanged glances that ranged from concern to skepticism. "You saw something on Fisher's Hill?" Mr. Snitowski asked. He owned the hardware store and fancied himself the voice of reason in town matters. "Not something," Mrs. May said. "A monster. A genuine monster." The word hung in the air. In 1952, people in Flatwoods didn't use such words lightly. We dealt with real things, crops and weather, births and deaths, the price of coal, and the war in Korea. Monsters belonged in comic books and late-night radio programs, not on hillsides 3/4 of a mile from home. Sheriff Carr arrived within the hour, a heavy man who breathed loud and always smelled of cigarettes and coffee. He listened to our story with his notebook out, pencil moving steadily. When we finished, he stood and adjusted his gun belt. "I'll take a look," he said. "Don't go alone," Mrs. May warned. He smiled in that way adults do when they think children have overreacted. "I've been sheriff here for 12 years. Haven't met anything yet that a flashlight and a service revolver couldn't handle." He returned an hour later, his confidence replaced by a troubled frown. Yes, he had found the clearing. Yes, there were strange marks in the grass, a flattened circular area where something heavy had rested. The fog remained thick, the smell strong enough to make him dizzy, but no creature, no glowing object. No red eyes in the darkness. Could have been a helicopter, he suggested without conviction. Military exercise gone wrong. The base isn't that far. But helicopters didn't leave the kind of marks he described. Grass not just flattened, but withered, turned black, as if exposed to tremendous heat. Helicopters didn't deposit an oily residue that made his hands burn when he touched it. And helicopters certainly didn't explain the fear that he admitted feeling in that clearing, a primitive certainty that he was in the presence of something hostile and utterly foreign. Word spread through Flatwoods overnight. By morning, reporters had arrived from Charleston and Sutton. They wanted to interview us, photograph the clearing, measure the marks. Each retelling of the story brought new details to light, details that should have been contradictory but weren't. We had all seen the same thing from slightly different angles. The pointed hood, the glowing eyes, the gliding movement, the impossible height. A reporter from the Braxton Democrat brought a sketch artist who drew the creature based on our descriptions. When he showed us the finished drawing, Teddy vomited. It was too accurate, too much like seeing it again in daylight. The image would later appear in newspapers across the state, then the country, becoming the standard representation of what people called the Flatwoods Monster. The second night, 3 more sightings occurred. The Snitowski's dog, a German shepherd that feared nothing, cowered under their porch and refused to come out. When Mr. Snitowski finally coaxed him into the yard, the dog stared at the sky and howled a sound his owners had never heard before. They looked up to see a dark shape pass overhead, too large for any bird, moving against the wind. 2 miles away, the Collins family was driving home from evening church service when their car engine died without warning. As Mr. Collins stepped out to check under the hood, his wife screamed. Standing in the road behind them was a tall figure with glowing eyes. It remained motionless for several seconds, then glided backward into the forest, never turning around, moving with that same horrible smoothness we had described. The third sighting was mine. I woke at 2 a.m. with a feeling of being watched. My bedroom window faced the hillside where we had encountered the creature. I lay still, afraid to move, afraid to look. The chemical smell had returned, seeping through the closed window. A red glow painted my ceiling in shifting patterns. Slowly, I turned my head. It stood in our yard, between the house and the barn, its eyes level with my second-story window. This close, I could see details we had missed in our terror the night before. The dark body had a texture like burnt leather, cracked and ridged. The pointed hood wasn't fabric, but part of the creature itself, rising from its shoulders in a seamless sweep. What I had taken for arms or wings were appendages that ended in delicate, claw-like projections that moved constantly, testing the air. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. Its eyes never blinked, never moved, but I felt examined, cataloged, evaluated. Then it raised one appendage toward my window. The glass began to fog from the outside, and shapes formed in the condensation, not random patterns, but deliberate marks, symbols or letters in no alphabet I recognized. The creature tilted its hood slightly, a gesture almost like a question. When I couldn't respond, frozen in terror, it glided backward across our yard, that horrible smooth motion that suggested it wasn't truly walking at all. It disappeared into the darkness, but the symbols remained on my window until morning, when the rising sun burned them away. I told no one about this encounter for years. By the third day, Flatwoods had transformed. Reporters filled the small hotel and boarding house. Scientists arrived from West Virginia University with radiation detectors and soil collection kits. The Air Force sent 2 officers who took statements and photographs, but offered no explanations. Tourists came by the carload, tramping through the Fisher property, taking pieces of burnt grass as souvenirs. The clearing itself had become more disturbing in daylight. The circular mark remained, 15 feet across. The grass not just dead but transformed into a black, oily substance that crumbled at a touch. The oak tree that had stood at the clearing's edge showed signs of heat damage on one side, its bark split and peeling. The chemical smell lingered despite the wind. Dr. Sanderson from the university spent hours in the clearing with his equipment. The radiation readings were elevated, but not dangerously so. The soil samples contained traces of materials he couldn't identify, metallic compounds that didn't match any known alloys. He found microscopic spheres of glass embedded in the tree bark, perfectly round, as if formed by incredible heat, followed by rapid cooling. Something was here, he told the gathered crowd. Something that generated tremendous heat and left residue I've never seen before. But what it was, he shrugged. Science deals with evidence, not speculation. The military officers were less forthcoming. They collected their samples, took their photographs, and left without comment. A week later, the official report stated that we had seen a meteor, that the creature was a barn owl, distorted by shadows and fear, that the chemical smell came from gases released by the meteor's impact. They didn't explain how a barn owl stood 10 feet tall or moved without flapping its wings. They didn't explain the symbols on my window or the Collins car that wouldn't start until every wire in its electrical system was replaced. As days passed, the sightings continued but grew less frequent. The Martinez family saw red eyes watching their house from the forest edge. The postman reported a large shape gliding between trees on his morning route. 3 different drivers on Route 19 described a tall figure standing beside the road that vanished when their headlights struck it. Then, on September 20th, 8 days after our encounter, everything stopped. The chemical smell faded. Animals returned to normal. No more sightings, no more glowing eyes, no more dark shapes against the sky. The clearing on Fisher's Hill began to recover, though the grass grew back strange, taller than the surrounding area, but pale, almost white, and it rustled without wind. The reporters left first, then the scientists, then the tourists. Flatwoods returned to its quiet existence, but we who had seen the creature were changed. Eugene Lemon joined the Air Force and never came back. The Neal family moved to Ohio. Mrs. May developed a nervous condition that kept her housebound for years. The younger boys had nightmares that required therapy, though in 1952 we didn't call it that. As for me, I became obsessed with understanding what we had encountered. I read every book on unexplained phenomena I could find. I wrote to researchers and investigators. I compiled witness testimonies and scientific reports. I needed the encounter to make sense, to fit into some framework of understanding. Years later, I discovered similar reports from around the world. Tall beings with glowing eyes, pointed, hood-like heads, smooth, gliding movement, chemical smells, and withered vegetation. The descriptions were too similar to be coincidence, spanning decades and continents. Whatever we encountered in Flatwoods had visited other places, other times. I returned to the clearing on Fisher's Hill every September 12th for 40 years, sometimes alone, sometimes with other witnesses who had moved back or never left. We would stand in the spot where our childhood ended, where we learned that the universe contained things beyond our understanding or control. The white grass still grew there, still rustled without wind. In 1992, on the 40th anniversary, I brought my grandson. He was 13, the same age I had been. As we stood in the clearing at dusk, he asked if I really believed we had seen a monster. "I don't know what we saw," I told him, "but I know it was real." The white grass rustled. For a moment, I smelled that chemical scent again, faint but unmistakable. My grandson grabbed my hand, and we stood together as darkness settled over the hill. Nothing appeared, no red eyes, no tall figure, no glowing object. But as we turned to leave, I saw marks in the condensation on my car windshield, the same symbols the creature had drawn on my window 40 years before. This time, I understood them, not their meaning that remained beyond me, but their purpose. They were a signature, a way of saying, I was here, I am real, I remember. We drove home in silence. My grandson never asked about the marks, and I never explained them. Some knowledge sits better in silence than in words. The town of Flatwoods still stands, though it's smaller now. The Fisher property was eventually sold and developed. Houses cover the hillside where we ran in terror that September night. But on certain evenings, when fog rises from the river and the air turns still, Residents report a chemical smell that makes their eyes water. Dogs bark at empty sky. Children wake claiming they saw red eyes at their windows. The witnesses from 1952 are mostly gone now. Neil died in Vietnam, Eugene in a plane crash. Mrs. May passed peacefully in her sleep at 91. But those of us who remain sometimes gather at the old general store, now a coffee shop, and sit quietly, not needing to speak about what we share. We know what the official reports say. We know what the skeptics believe. We know what science can and cannot explain. None of that changes what we saw on that hillside when we were children, when the universe opened just wide enough to show us that our small town, our small world, was part of something vast and strange and utterly indifferent to our understanding. The creature from Flatwoods Monster, alien, interdimensional visitor, whatever it was, left more than burnt grass and frightened children. It left questions that have no answers, memories that time cannot fade, and the absolute certainty that we are not alone, have never been alone, and that what shares this universe with us operates by rules we cannot begin to comprehend. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about those red eyes. In the dreams, they're not threatening, merely watchful, patient, waiting. For what? I don't know. But I wake with the feeling that the encounter in 1952 was not an ending, but a beginning. That those 8 days in September were just the first notes in a song we're too small to hear in its entirety. My grandson is grown now, with children of his own. He's never spoken about that evening on Fisher's Hill when the symbols appeared on the windshield. But last year, he called me. His daughter, 13 years old, had seen something strange while camping with her scout troop in the Monongahela National Forest. A tall figure with red eyes moving through the trees without sound. The other girls saw it too. The scout leaders reported it as a bear, though no bear stands upright for that long or moves that smoothly. What should I tell her? My grandson asked. Tell her she's not crazy, I said. Tell her to remember everything, and tell her that some things in this world don't need to be understood to be real. The Flatwoods Monster, as the newspapers called it, became a legend, a tourist attraction, a subject of documentaries and books. People still come to Flatwoods looking for answers, for proof, for some trace of what happened. They interview the remaining witnesses, examine the old photographs, stand in what they think was the clearing. Most leave disappointed, having found nothing but stories and small-town folklore. But sometimes, just sometimes, a visitor will come to me with a strange expression, holding their phone or camera. They show me a photograph taken on Fisher's Hill, a shadow too tall, eyes too red, a shape that shouldn't be there. They ask if this is real, if this could be what we saw. I look at their evidence, usually blurry, often ambiguous. Then I look at their faces, at the mix of excitement and fear, the need to understand wrestling with the terror of actually understanding. I don't know what you photographed, I tell them, the same words I've used for 70 years. But I know what we saw was real. They always ask the same follow-up question. Do you think it will come back? I think about the symbols on the window, the intelligence behind those red eyes, the way it observed us with such patient intensity. I think about my great-granddaughter's sighting and the reports that still trickle in from around the world. I think it never really left, I answer. And on foggy nights, when the chemical smell returns and the white grass rustles without wind, I stand at my window and watch the darkness. Not with fear anymore that faded decades ago, but with a strange anticipation. Because I know, with the certainty that comes from witnessed impossibility, that we were chosen to see something extraordinary. Not chosen for any special quality or purpose, but randomly selected to be witnesses to a truth larger than our small lives can contain. The creature we encountered on Fisher's Hill in September 1952 was real. It was here. It may still be here. And that knowledge, terrible and wonderful, has shaped every day of my life since. Not because I understand what happened, I don't, but because I know that understanding isn't necessary for truth. Some nights, when conditions are right, you can still see lights on Fisher's Hill. The new residents think it's car headlights or house lights reflecting off fog. Those of us who were there in 1952 know better. We know those lights pulse with a rhythm that matches no earthly source. We know they're watching, waiting, remembering, just as we remember them. The Flatwoods Monster remains a mystery, a question mark in the orderly progression of history. But for 7 children on a September evening in 1952, it was no mystery. It was immediate, overwhelming reality that we could neither deny nor fully accept. It was the night we learned that the world contains spaces we cannot map, beings we cannot categorize, and experiences that will never fit into the filing cabinets of official explanation. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.